Okay, hi everybody. Thanks very much for logging on. I'm Adam Gordon. I am CEO of Candidate.ID. This is our fourth talent talk of the year. We do these, we've started accelerating the pace that we do these actually. We do it probably once every 2 weeks now because we're getting great feedback. So we wanted to do this session on sourcing because there's so much chat about how it's changing, how technology is impacting on it. Will we all have jobs in 5 years? Artificial intelligence, all sorts of other different aspects to it. So I'm delighted to welcome two very special guests. Today we've got Martin Lee, who I had the pleasure of working with for a couple of years at Social Media Search, and is undoubtedly one of the world's leading experts on talent sourcing. And also Toby Culshaw, who is Head of Talent Intelligence at Philips and one of our stellar advisory board members at Candidate.ID. So I'm just going to ask Martin to just give himself a quick introduction, and then Toby is going to give us a presentation on the future of sourcing, and then we're going to go into Q&A. Just in terms of questions, you can ask questions in a couple of different ways. You can either do it on Twitter using the hashtag Candidate.ID, or on the kind of login panel that you've got for joining this webinar. You can ask questions in there as well. So, Martin, quick introduction from you, please.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, everybody. So yeah, my name's Martin Lee. I'm currently a partner at Brain Gain Recruiting, which includes our training arm called Sourcing Certification. So a lot of our work is training in-house and agency recruiters on how to source. So we have quite an extensive library of those sort of things, and that's one of our main parts of our business. We do remain hands-on recruiters and sourcers as well. I think that's quite important if you're going to train to actually be a practitioner as well. And we get involved with all sorts of interesting type of projects, so deep kind of research, mapping of companies, finding everybody. And I also consult with some companies on sourcing strategies, building in-house sourcing teams, that kind of thing. So very much a geek, and I run a number of communities on LinkedIn. One of them is, we're going to talk about tools today, and one of those is cool free tools for recruiting, which everybody's welcome to join. That's me.
Great, thanks. Toby, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind words earlier. I would certainly class Martin as both a legend and stellar, but I'm nowhere near those ranks, but I appreciate it anyway. I'll break into the presentation because that gives a bit of an idea of who I am anyway. So obviously, if anyone's got any questions as we go through, ask at any time as well. I've been in sourcing, research, recruitment, headhunting for a fair while now. Currently, as Adam mentioned, over at Philips, I lead their global talent intelligence function, which is a function not a lot of companies have. But I think it's certainly going to be something for the future, and that's obviously something we can discuss as we go through this, and obviously at the Q&A at the end, happy to have a chat through it as well. Throughout my career, really, it's all been around how do we make the biggest business impact with the intel we're gathering through our activities. So all of the headhunting we do, all of the mapping we do, all of the sourcing we do, we're getting intelligence through all of that. And I think it was really important to get ahead of the curve and really make as big a business impact as we can with all that information. I think it's something that we're not all doing as well as we should, really. But we can discuss that as we go through. So, really easy starter for us. What is sourcing? There's a whole heap of different debates that will go around definitions, etc., and nuanced differences of handovers and handoffs. Essentially, it's the identification, assessment, and engagement. It's of skilled workers. It's that proactive recruiting technique. It's getting out there, finding these people, and then making sure you're both engaging with them and obviously assessing them through that engagement as well. That's a traditional Wikipedia type definition that we'd all be fairly comfortable with, which is great. So bear that in mind as we go through. Evolution of sourcing functions. This is primarily aimed at the internal piece, so it's looking at both SMEs and enterprise. Generally speaking, with a sourcing function, you get brought in to get rid of the agencies. You're throwing money hand over fist at these agencies to find these rare species, these rare beasts. So you bring in some specialists. You hire a sourcing function, there's a number of sources, to come in and stop that agency spend. As they build credibility, as they get a bit of a track record of finding these rare species and build that relationship, you can then get in front of a business, start building that relationship, understanding their needs, start getting ahead of the curve, pipelining your candidates. Everyone loves a good talent pipeline. Getting a real understanding, know what's going on, getting the talent way ahead of time, and obviously things go great. You improve everything you want to improve and reduce the cost. So it's all looking great. But what do you do after that? And I think that's the tipping point we're at. So a lot of companies at the moment, we're getting great pipelines going, we're getting good candidates in the door, we're filling the roles. But the problem, particularly in enterprise, is year on year, you're going to be looked at saying, okay, well, that's great. Can you now do more with less? Can you be more efficient? Can you be more effective? And I think that's the tipping point we're at, where we've got two directions to go. One is continued cost efficiencies. You know, the whole business case of the sourcing function was geared up around reducing costs. It was initially around that reducing the agency spend. So do we continue to cut costs and try and run in a more efficient manner? So that could be hiring more junior people, that could be offshoring, outsourcing, it could be cranking up the load on the sourcing team. So you're no longer running at 6 recs each, you could be running at 15, 20, 30, 50 recs each. That's one route. The other route is shifting to a value center. And that's where you're really looking at a completely different beast. You're taking the intel that I mentioned earlier and really transforming it so that you can be seen as a value center across the organization. And that comes back to this definition of sourcing. You know, as we mentioned, identification, assessment, the proactive recruiting, that's the absolute bread and butter. Filling those roles, that's the basics and foundations of any function. But if we really want to earn any kind of strategic value, we need to go way beyond that, in my opinion. And I'm not going to say this is going to be right for everyone. This is just where I see things going. But I think the skill sets we have and the individuals we have within sourcing are entirely the right types of skill sets and individuals to push that value piece. So when we look at this cycle again, you know, we have the same cycle up to the point of improved quality, speed, efficiency, reduced cost. The problem is, though, you still have your purple squirrels. You know, you've never really done anything to address the skill set. You still get problem locations. We haven't addressed that yet. You know, we could have a site where when we opened the site 15, 20 years ago, there was a fantastic candidate pool. There were fantastic competition. But in that 15, 20 years, we've put everyone else out of business and there are no candidates anymore. We're not addressing that. You could have problem children. You could have bought a company with a toxic brand, with a toxic leadership team, with a skill set that doesn't exist in the marketplace. Equally, crystal ball. We're not addressing what's happening in the future. Everything thus far has been reactive given the business demands. Even the pipelining, it's reacting to what the business is saying generally. It's not getting ahead of the curve. So that crystal ball piece, what's happening in the future? This is all stuff that I think the sourcing function can and should be addressing. You know, it's all stuff that we have the knowledge on. We're just not necessarily packaging it in the right way to the business. So these are sorts of activities that a sourcing function can get involved with. You know, location feasibilities, involved with the strategy team, involved with M&A functions, looking at the sales and using sourcing intel for commercial advantage. If you're going into a big pitch meeting and you as a sourcing function know that the program director for your key competitor has just been headhunted out and they're leaving and they can't actually deliver on any of their promises, that's useful to your commercial guys. Looking at organizational design. all our industries at the moment are going to be suffering from the digitization. We're all moving into that digital sphere, but most companies aren't geared up for that. We don't know what a marketing function in a digital organization should look like. We don't know. We haven't had that. So looking at organizational design and using the intel we gather day in, day out from talking to all these candidates, work with the business. Use that information, work with the business to help influence that organizational design. Benchmarking across skills, location, salary, whatever it may be. Things move rapidly nowadays, particularly on the tech side of things. You could be looking at salary surveys that the consulting firms have taken a year to gather. They then publish it for a further year, assuming the organisation is keeping up to date with this stuff. Their data could still be 2 years out of date. And in a world where salaries shift rapidly, having that real world data saying candidate X from company Y is earning this, this is how they compare, that benchmarking is invaluable. It's really invaluable. Market assessments, skill studies, impact assessments, etc. These are all things that we can get involved with. The impact assessments are particularly fun because they're so difficult. Brexit, what's going to be the impact on our workforce? We really don't know. No one knows, but looking into those and posing those questions, because that's the sort of thing that's keeping the balls up at night. It's okay, well, how are we going to address this? The impact of President Trump coming in and how he's going to change visa statuses. How's that going to impact the business? There is a dollar value that's going to place upon us. How can we really help to mitigate the risk? And that comes back to what I think is the key things that we should be doing as a function, and it's all around feasibility and risk. That's the area that we are experts in. We just don't necessarily realise we're experts in yet. Sourcing has access to all this information. We have access to a plethora of information. That's one thing we're not short of in a sourcing function, is information. We just need to package it better. We need to pull it together so that we can go to the business and say, look, these are your labour risks. This is the labour feasibility of your M&A deal. If we're looking to buy a company, land and expand, if we're looking to put another 1,000 headcount in there, is that feasible? A lot of business cases will be built on getting this workforce in, getting the sales guys in, getting the manufacturing plant in place. But is that feasible? Is there the workforce there that's going to accommodate that? What's the competition in that marketplace? Are you suddenly going to get some of the really big hitting firms coming in and just absorbing all the talent in there? This is stuff that traditionally an M&A function wouldn't necessarily look into, or if they do look into it, it'll be done through one of the big consulting firms. This is exactly the sort of work that we, as a sourcing function, will be doing. We will look at markets, and we will look at total addressable markets. We will look at the skill sets within there. We will look at the competitive landscape within there. It's just we're doing it much, much later in the cycle. We're doing it 12 months down the line when you've gone through the M&A and you've got your first round of leavers, or 18 months down the line, etc. It's too late. We need to get right earlier in that decision-making process so we can really influence much, much earlier. And I think that one of the key things I think around all of this is shifting that conversation. Yep.
Toby, sorry, can I ask a quick question? It's Adam.
Yeah.
Does this mean that sourcing functions have got the opportunity and will become much, much higher value than they have been in the past or up until now? In terms of the work that they do.
Yeah, for me, it depends on that crossroads. It depends on what direction you want to go. I think if we go down the cost conversation, then I think they'll become more transactional. They'll become lower value, higher volume. I think the conversation will be purely around cost efficiency, and it'll be very difficult. I think you go down the value conversation, and that's it's all about reframing this conversation. If you go around the value piece, and you can be seen to be adding value, you become much more of a strategic partner. And I think with that, absolutely, the sourcing functions can go through the roof. The work we're doing at Philips, industries and our businesses are screaming out for this information. There is no shortage of a desire to have this information. They haven't known it's there. It's not, and in some instances it hasn't been there before. The aggregation of all this big labour data, there haven't necessarily been tools there to do that sort of stuff. But absolutely, I think if we reframe the conversation, get the conversation away from cost to value, look at how we can engage in a more strategic way, absolutely, I think the sourcing function can just go through the roof. I think there's two words that I kind of live by, from a work capacity at least, and I drill it into my team on every single piece of work we do, every single bit of comms we send out, and it's the two most important words I think going, and that's so what. The reason I say that is every time we present back to the business aren't experts in sourcing, the business aren't experts in recruiting, they're not experts in labour force dynamics. They're sitting there going, so what? What are you telling me? What does all this mean? Cut out the noise and just tell me what I need to know. And I think that's probably the bit that most people struggle with. Most people are very good at presenting data. And I think when I've led sourcing teams and look at the work they push back to the business, they're very good at presenting data. They're very good at presenting this total addressable market. They're very good at presenting the data around what the key skill sets are and who's got what where and the volume of the skills, etc. They're very good at presenting that data. They're not very good generally at presenting insight. They're not very good at taking that data and saying, okay, what does this actually mean? So to address, so what? From the business. And I think that's one of the key differences if we want to hit that value chain and really, really improve the value conversation, is taking that data and turning it into insight. But I think overall, this is my opinion, but this is really just me having a chat around what I think and where I think things are going. Ultimately, it's down to you guys. It's down to the industry. What do we want as the future of sourcing? What do we want to be cost focused? Do we want to be that cost center and that real cost efficiency beast? That's absolutely fine if we are. That's absolutely fine. But it's a different industry. It's a different business. What other areas of the business do we think that you could really influence and work with? Do you want to generally, a sourcing function's primary role is to support the TA function? And I say support deliberately there. Even though it's a partnership, I think quite often they're geared up and they're set up to support the recruiters. And I don't think that should be the way. It should be, in the first instance, an absolutely equal relationship. It should be a partnership, not a support role. But I think equally, the sourcing team can influence far broader business areas than we are at the moment, far, far broader, and think beyond just pure recruiting. And the key thing, I think, is shifting that focus from that cost center to a value center. I think it's, for me, the number one thing to change. Once you're shifting that focus and shift the whole conversation, then you can start saying, okay, well, we're getting increased demand on the value types of work. We need to change the rec load we're carrying. We need to change the way we're engaging with people. We need to change the sorts of reporting we're doing. We need to change the sorts of skill sets we have within here. We need to change our ways of thinking from a data set to an insight set, etc. I think it shifts everything, but it's easier said than done. That's a really hard conversation to have at very senior levels as well. You can, depending on your organisation, that can be a really, really tough sell. Really tough sell. But I think it's one we need to keep fighting the battle on. And the old sayings of if you don't change the ways you're working, you're always going to get the same results. Equally, new mindset, new results. And that's me. It's been a whistle-stop tour. But yeah, if anyone's got any questions, queries, happy to answer them. If not, I know we've got a fair few questions about the future of sourcing from a more AI and bots, etc. So quite happy to take questions, or we can discuss other bits as we move forward.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Toby. I've got it's really a point actually for your comment rather than a direct question. But one of our clients is it is a Fortune 500 biotech company, international business, and they've just moved to they've just created a sourcing team of around 40 internationally. And the way they've gone about doing that is they've moved, because they were mostly 360-degree recruiters until then, they've basically taken their top 40 best 360-degree recruiters and said, we want you to be the sourcing team. Some of them, I think, there's a couple of reasons why they did this. One was because I think in some businesses, the sourcing team is seen as almost like the poor cousin within talent acquisition, when it's really transactional, and it's also seen as an entry-level role into talent acquisition. But as I say, they basically took their 40 highest performing 360-degree recruiters and said, we want you to be the sourcing team. What do you think about that as an approach?
Yeah, it is. I think it's a very interesting one. I think there are. It depends on what they mean by the best, if I'm going to be honest. But assuming that they've got that bit nailed down and that's all correct, I think there's an interesting move happening that I've seen a few companies looking at where sourcing is shifting because of the handoff in relationship generally between a sourcer will identify, go out, talk to the candidate, headhunt them, approach them, however you want to turn that, do the whole sell. And then when that handoff into the recruiting part of the business, generally speaking, the recruiting part of the business is a machine. It's around getting people through the process, ticking the boxes, going through to a shared service environment, etc., to set up the calls or whatever it may be. And you lose a lot of candidates because they're suddenly going from this very high touch, very high value conversation and engagement level to a process. And they don't want to be in a process. They weren't actively looking for a job generally. You know, they want that high touch, high value. So I'm seeing a lot of conversations around, do the sources then take the full 360 ownership for the roles that they pick up? And I know that's certainly something we did back at Tallis when I ran the team there. It was very much a case of if we took ownership of a role, that was then our role. And I think there is, we could see another convergence around, does sourcing become 360 recruiting just for very niche, high value roles? So it's once again comes back to that agency cost avoidance, but it's done in a different way, very low rec volumes, but very high touch, high value. So more akin to what you'd see for an internal exec search team.
Okay, that's quite interesting. And I've seen one other company, I've seen a bank. They've kind of turned their sourcing team are kind of almost like a 360-degree recruiting team, but at the opposite end, at the kind of really high volume area, like call center and retail, basically, which is quite interesting. They've actually made that shift. So anyway, we're going to move on to some more kind of practical kind of how do you actually do a lot of this stuff, and also a sense of like the human element versus the technology element, what's all changing. So we'll bring Martin in now as well. So my question, I'm going to start with my first question, which is, what are the main tools and technologies that are essential for today's sourcing professionals, and how are they likely to change? So I'll direct that at you, Martin, to begin with.
Okay. I mean, we've seen in my time. I mean, I started in recruitment in '99, where we had one internet machine in the corner of the room, which had a cloth over it. You know, so I've seen it go in a really short space of time from that to just a huge amount of tools that do everything. You know, and if you look at what we have today, we've got automation tools that can do everything from, you know, the initial part, CV screening and parsing. We've got tools now that do the actual sourcing, Boolean builders and all sorts of things like that. We've even got psychometric testing, and now we're moving into the era of bots. You know, actual bits of software that talk to potential candidates. So it's fascinating to see what's happening and how things are changing. And if you think about you know, the emergence of platforms like LinkedIn and even Facebook and these sorts of things, where people are going onto these platforms and there's a huge amount of data, and then we see the emergence of these technologies which recognizes the need to be able to source in these particular platforms, and you'll see aggregator tools, so, you know, Hiring Solved and Dice and all these other ones, which recognize that there are now all of these platforms where all of these various people go. So IT people go to one platform, and project managers will maybe go to another. So these tools automate this sourcing of that. But if you want to break it down to what are the essential tools and technologies for today, then I mean, I always say in my training that the best tool you will ever have is your brain. So that's what I try and encourage people on training to use first, is their actual brain. For other fundamentals, I mean, I will always say that Google and search engines are kind of the first place that you can go to open all of the other doors, and I think it's essential still to be able to know how to use search engines and how to, you know, work your way around the web to find the information that you need. And there's so much information out there. You need those base skills, I think. And we're seeing, you know, certainly when we look at sites like LinkedIn and response rates coming down and down and down, and the amount of recruiters on there, we're seeing now an emergence of other tools which help recruiters and sourcers find personal contact details. So I have, and just looking at my screen here, the amount of extensions I have at the top, probably 40 or 50 or so, and probably half of those are related to finding people's personal contact details, because, you know, emails are one way of doing it, but we still prefer the old school method of picking up the phone if we can, or sending an email to a personal email address. So, you know, tools like Profit and Hunter, I have Lusher installed, I've got Hire Tool installed, Rocket Reach, Email Hunter, the list goes on. And then other tools like Sidekick is, you know, I'm listing tools that I use every day, and Sidekick is something that sits within Outlook, which when somebody opens your email, it just notifies you of that. So I think the secret to tools is to not be bamboozled by them, and you know, they are kind of shiny little toys. It's really how you use the tools, and sometimes it's interesting when you kind of bolt one tool onto another. So we're seeing an emergence of those type of tools. You know, if you think about IFTTT, and there's another one called Zapier, Zapier.com, which kind of allow you to, you know, if something happens here, then do that. And I think those tools are quite interesting. I think we'll see some more emergence of those. But you know, there are so many tools. If you just want to have a look, just go to the Chrome store and just do some searches. Even if you just put something like LinkedIn into there, you'll see hundreds of them. But I think you just need to kind of have a game plan of what you're looking to do before you start downloading all these tools. You know, if your aim is to find personal contact details, then there's plenty of tools to do that. But don't get bamboozled by them. Just use the ones which are useful. And there's a whole list on our website, on booleanstrings.com, of the ones we recommend, including scraping tools and everything else in between.
Okay, let's come on to sort of the future. And there's a lot of conversation about artificial intelligence and bots and big data and other kind of concepts that are not brand new, but they're starting to really emerge as being practical in terms of sourcing, as far as I can see.
Yeah.
What do you think are, you know, is it too early to invest in these? Is it too early to really get involved? And where are we in terms of, like, are we in the future yet or not?
I think we're kind of in between at the moment. You know, it's kind of early stages of developing these things, but I mean, my rule of thumb really is that if a tool can do it better than I can, then I'll use it. There's not many tools I've seen, even if you know, think about these aggregators that search across multiple platforms and then find, you know, I can do all of that stuff myself, but actually these tools can probably do it quicker. So that, you know, I don't think we should think, well, you know, I'm a sourcer, I should do it myself. If there are tools out there that can do this better, then why not use them? You know, I always think though that I'm always slightly worried about using a tool because I'm kind of lost within their algorithm. You know, if they're searching one way, then would that human element make it a better search? And sometimes I think, yes, I think the human element is better on certain of them. But you know, I would invest in some of these tools. A lot of these tools are free. We're not just talking about a monetary investment. You know, a lot of these tools are free as well. So I would test them. You know, and I think different tools work for different markets as well. If we're talking about these bots which talk to people, you know, you log onto a website and there's jobs, and it actually asks you how many years experience have you got, and it takes you kind of through that process to qualify you. And I think that works in certain environments. I probably wouldn't use that for higher end jobs, but if you think about volume jobs, just to qualify people, or you know, even companies that receive thousands of applications, that could be a useful tool there. But if I was to think about executive search, would I use that? Then probably not. So you know, different tools for different things, I think. But it's a fascinating time, and there's some great tools, and I think, you know, I think we really need to know what they are, and to look at them and maybe kind of tailor that to who we're trying to recruit and our own individual companies.
So I've seen a brilliant one on that bots. I've seen an absolutely brilliant one. I was at Talent Tech Labs in New York a couple of weeks ago, and there's a company called Avrio, A-V-R-I-O. Their website is goavrio.com. And it basically, yeah, I mean, you send in your CV, and then it'll say, hey, let's talk. I see that you are a software developer, but you haven't said that you've got any Ruby on Rails experience, do you?
Yeah.
And then you say yes, and it goes, great. Have you got, what, a year, 2 years, more? And it talks to you, and it's pretty natural language, and I really liked it. Yeah. Toby, what do you think about this, like, artificial intelligence and big data and automation and what's your thoughts about what's coming up?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two different aspects. I think the big data piece, I think is brilliant. If I'm going to be honest, I think having the economies of scale and that real aggregated intel perspective, particularly what I do at the kind of intelligence level, looking at large data sets, you know, you're not looking for an individual, you're looking for what does the trend tell us? Is this feasible? Is it going to be risky? You know, what's the overall trend on this, rather than looking for a specific person. I think that's brilliant, and I could only see that getting stronger and more advanced and of more use. I think on the kind of AI bot type side of things, I think it's good. You know, I think there's a lot of people that are scared of the tech, and they're very quick to pick holes in the tech, and they see it as, you know, doing them out of a job, etc. I'm kind of in the same opinion as Martin, though. You know, if your job, kind of maybe a slightly different style from Martin, though, if your job is so transactional that it can be automated, then you will be automated. You know, if full stop. But what you should be doing is taking your job beyond that, and then getting the elements that can be automated, get them automated, get them into a chatbot or an AI or whatever, or then provide the value add, go above and beyond that. So yeah, I'm a firm fan of it. I think bring it on. I'd go way further than I think most on that stuff.
Okay, so I saw a great statistic recently from the McKinsey Global Institute, which said that they analyzed over 2,000 different professional activities in something like 85 different countries. And they concluded that only around 5% of jobs are going to be fully automated, and the job will not exist at all in 5 years' time. Whereas 60% of the total jobs, 30% of the activities that can be done within those jobs will be automated. So basically, for most people, look at the job you're doing just now, 30% of it is going to be automated. Now, that leads on to a question we've got here from Gabriel, which is, how much of the human element of sourcing is going to be lost in the next 5 years?
Well, everyone's worried about that, aren't they? I think we'll be okay. I don't know. It depends what tools emerge, you know, and these technologies and these tools are there, I guess, to get recruiters and sources to do what they're best at, and that is normally that human element of talking to people, of matching, of helping them through the process, and that kind of thing. You know, it's so difficult to predict. If you think about 5 years ago, what we had 5 years ago, there are tools now that have actually automated some of the bits that I can do, and you know, certainly things like finding contact information and data-rich sites like Zoom Info have come on so well in the last few years. So, you know, I do go to these places and I will use these things, but I guess, I mean, sometimes it's just kind of a sixth sense of knowing what to call people about and what to message people about. I remember I was at SourceCon in Denver in 2014, and there's a lady called Amy Beth Quinn, and she was doing a demo of some email software which basically parsed bits of people's profiles, whether that be LinkedIn or a CV or something. So it was taking companies and it was taking job titles, and it was basically creating a bespoke message. So it looked like a personal message, but it was actually automated. And I can dig that up for, if somebody wants that presentation, I can send it to them. But you know, it's kind of fascinating. But I don't know, if you add that extra human element of a bit of humour or a bit of personalisation, then I don't think you'll ever lose that. You know, that will always be essential in my view.
Yeah, just from my side, I think it's. I completely agree on the personal element. I think you can almost go two different routes, like everything in life in my world, it seems. I think there are going to be companies that go full on with the automation piece, and you'll have lots of very customized, very intelligent bits of kit that will send out very targeted, intelligent content, whether it's a message to individuals, etc., etc. Yeah, I think that will be there, but equally, in the same way that we get, you know, all of us nowadays will get targeted content marketing. You know full well that's targeted content marketing. You know that hasn't been a marketeer sat there saying, yeah, Toby, you're going to love to hear all about whatever it is in whatever location. We know that doesn't happen. But I think the personal element will definitely kick in when, you know, in the same way that you get a lot of email saturation, etc., when there is a lot of saturation around this automated tools, and people say, do you know what, I don't want to get spammed with 15 million emails a day. Someone pick up the phone and just talk to me. So I think we'll probably have a bigger pushback on that personal contact piece, and I think that'll probably come to the fore even more when you have a much more fluid workforce, when you're looking ahead to the whole gig economy type piece. You're losing swathes of the workforce that are probably more traditional in the way that they like to engage. I think that personal contact is going to become more and more important.
Yeah. I think one of the things with one of the big benefits of these technologies that they can do, and you know, the purpose of an initial message for me when trying to contact a candidate is not to shoehorn a job into that candidate. You know, I think we see far too much of that. You know, messages from recruiters on LinkedIn using an email. The subject is the title of the job, and then it's just a description of the job, and there's no personalisation with that whatsoever. So for me, when I'm messaging candidates, it's the purpose of that message is to get a conversation, and I think certainly some of these technologies can do that. They can help facilitate that, they can help automate that, and they can certainly do that in greater volume than we can do. But you know, I guess it's what is the purpose of using these tools, and what's your kind of end game.
Okay, great. Let's just go on to kind of the sort of, other than specific kind of technologies, let's talk about, for people who source every day, what are the main bits of advice that you give to them, like non-technology type stuff, the human bit?
Human bit, yeah, okay. That's a good question, and you know, as I say, it's very easy to get lost in specific technologies. But I mean, Toby is a classic example here of somebody who works for a great company like Philips, and his job is to do research. So I would, you know, I've worked with a number of people. And I've seen the people I've seen promoted are the people that kind of challenge the status quo. You know, they're the ones who do the job day to day, and you think, well, you know, this bit could actually be better. Or when I'm contacting candidates about a job, I'm not getting a good response, and I would take it back to research for companies as well. And this is some of the work that I get involved with it, which is before you even get to that recruitment piece, do you understand the candidate landscape? Are you mapping people? Do you understand where they work? Do you understand the locations of these offices? What's the commute like? What are their salaries? What are the benefits? What's the feedback on the brand? So I think research is a great thing to do before you even get to this recruitment piece, and I don't see that many companies doing it. Some companies do it extremely well. Companies like Pepsi and Apple, for example. But for other advice, I mean, for hands-on sources.
Martin, can I just go back a second and ask you a question about that? How much like job discipline sort of knowledge do you think people need to be sourcers? So, for example, if I'd been, you know, recruiting accountants for 5 years, am I going to be able to pick up recruiting technology people?
I mean, the difference between now and when I started is that there's so much stuff online to help you do that, and I think there's a definite advantage of knowing your market, but I think you can source anybody within any market, and the tools are there to do that. I do think you need to be specifically within a market to have a deep understanding. You know, if you want to talk to a scientist, then I think you need to really understand your subject, and the same with IT people and accountants and everybody else. But the tools are there to actually do it. I think the key to being a good sourcer is to having the enthusiasm to start with. You know, I remember when I first looked at it, and my mind was, after working in an agency, my mind was blown of what you could actually do by searching on the internet. And I remember thinking at the time, you know, what have I been doing? Just looking through a database and advertising. You know, we've got this huge amount of data on the internet which we can search for on all these different platforms now. And if you're inquisitive, and if you want to press buttons, and if you think of every site where people go as a potential place to source, then, you know, why not? You know, I did a presentation in Russia a couple of weeks ago, and we were looking at Ruby on Rails developers, and we ended up in YouTube looking at people actually doing videos on Ruby on Rails, and drilling down further to their actual location. So you know, and they loved it. The fact that they thought, oh, we can now source from YouTube, and why not? But you do need that kind of inquisitive mind to be able to think that way. So I hate the old cliche thinking out of the box, but it certainly is when it comes to sourcing. You know, it's a case of thinking where your audience are, and then having that inquisitive nature to go and search within these places, I think.
I met a sourcing manager from John Lewis about 2 years ago, and they had to, it was in 2015, and during that year, they got briefed with sourcing a lifeguard, because right. John Lewis runs like a leisure center for, it's got like a hotel type place, conference kind of place for they're not staff, or their colleagues or partners, for the partners. Okay. And they also had to source a shepherd, because they own farms, and I thought they were two weird and wonderful ones for a company like that.
Yeah. Oh, there's some great examples, and Adam, you and I have done some fun stuff at Social Media Search when we were thinking of different ways of doing it. But I remember the example at Kelly as well. We were sourcing. We were trying to find people in rural Ireland for part-time work, and of course, you know, it's kind of a tricky one. But we ended up putting the town name into Facebook just to see what communities and what groups there were, and we stumbled across a page that was selling baby clothes within this particular town. So therefore the assumption is that if people are selling baby clothes, they are likely to be young parents, so they are more likely to be open for part-time work. And so I think you can have some fun with it, but it's just kind of that way of thinking sometimes, which is not kind of a keyword search in LinkedIn sometimes.
Yeah, can you tell us about your it wasn't Road Menders, it was one of the other Northampton clubs, your nightclub revisited, disco revisited, basically.
Yeah, all right, okay. I could finish off on that one. That was it was a good one. It was a friend of mine actually in Northampton who runs a B2B company. They set appointments for other businesses. They're kind of like an additional sales arm. And he came to me and he said, I need to recruit part-time people in our Northampton offices, and he said, you know, just kind of the office environment means that it's better to have middle-aged women. Just kind of they just seem to gel better, and you know, we just got a nice environment that way. And of course you can't advertise for that, you know, and you can't, it's difficult to search for. So I just kind of thought about it, and I thought, well, how do I really nail down on that demographic of Northampton, that particular age range, and female, and we ended up creating a Facebook group which was called Memories of Ritz's, and it's still there on Facebook if people want to look at it. But Ritz's was a nightclub which was obviously in North. I think there's a chain of Ritz's all over the place, but because we called it Memories of Ritzy Northampton, we encouraged people to join. And I knew that the nightclub had been knocked down to build the car park for the Saints Rugby Club, so I knew, you know, the actual age range of people joining that group would be people who would have been at that nightclub in a certain period of time. So we created the group and put some songs in there and some pictures of the old nightclub and this kind of thing, and we had 900 people join in 2 days. So it was a group set up to recruit people, but actually it was a group set up to entice people based on their demographics. And of course, as a group admin, you can just send a message. So we messaged all 900 people and ended up with 20 or so people applying for the job, and he filled all the jobs. I wish I'd have charged for it, but he was a friend of mine, so it was just kind of an exercise in use of social media, but it was, I think, a good example of, you know, people think, well, we need to use Facebook and we'll create a company page, but that, you know, that it just doesn't really work. You know, people need to land on that. They need to be an active job seeker, whereas, you know, the Island group and the Ritzy group were just different ways of using platforms and having fun with it, I think.
I couldn't agree more. You've got it when you're trying to attract people who are 80% of people are not, at least 80% of people are not in the jobs market. The 80% figure comes from LinkedIn, but it's going to be higher than that. Where people are not in the job market, you've got to talk. You've got to start the conversation about something that's not, do you fancy this job? Anyway, I've got one kind of last question, and this is from Siobhan. So the question is, what are best practices for getting potential candidates to respond to your initial message?
Well, set up a Ritzy group in Facebook. I think, you know, despite all this talk of technology, I think still that this is really where the human element comes in for me. And you know, again, I'll refer back to Kelly days, but I remember meeting one team, and they felt kind of pressure to get 100 messages out a day, because they felt the more messages, the more chance they've got of filling it. And I kind of reined them in and said, instead of writing 100 messages, why don't you write 10 very specific messages and think about every single part of that component message, so that when that person opens it, number one, they are going to open it, and number two, it's going to motivate them to actually respond. So, you know, reading profiles, cross-referencing against different platforms. You know, you can look at somebody on LinkedIn, you just need to probably copy and paste their name into Facebook, and it's quite easy to find them. And if you cross-reference and build up a picture of that person, then you tailor that message to that person. And it's not just hard skills. We're not just talking about jobs here. We are talking about locations and you know, what companies are doing and this kind of thing. If you personalise things, and there's a lady called Katrina Collier who many of you will probably know. She's got some great material on this if you want to check her out. But she calls it being human, and I would absolutely agree with that. You know,
our last talent talk actually. So if anybody wants a copy of wants the video, a link to the video, then let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just this being human element, and again, when I train people, one of the phrases I always use is how easy is it for them to ignore you? You know, if you've put no effort into your message and you've just copied and pasted a job, then it's very easy for people to ignore you. But if you're a person and you know you ask the right questions and you show you've read their profile, etc., then you're much more likely to get a response from people that way.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. Thanks. That's 1 o'clock. We're on time. I just only really got one more thing to do, and that's to thank Toby very much for talking to us about the future of sourcing, and also to thank Martin for adding a lot of extra context, practical, how to go about actually doing the job of finding people and getting people to respond to you and that kind of thing. So, guys, as ever, many thanks, and I hope that everybody who's dialed in for this has enjoyed it. I look forward to talking to you next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Cheers.